How could you be so stupid? David's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and merciless. I knew it, his mother, Eleanor, added, her tone dripping with disdain. Giving money to a woman is always a mistake. Amina sat motionless, absorbing their venom like a stone wall in a storm. If this scene already has you hooked, hit subscribe, comment with your time and location. To them, she was a failure, the naive wife who had bankrupted their comfortable lives. They saw tears of regret, but what they failed to see was the cold, calculating clarity in her eyes. Little did they know, the woman they were lecturing about financial ruin was secretly the architect of their downfall, armed with a truth worth $50 million. Their world was about to be turned upside down, not by a mistake, but by a test. And the person they believed was their greatest liability was about to become their judge. The dining room in Amina's suburban New Jersey home glowed under the soft light of a crystal chandelier, a relic of a life she'd built with meticulous care. The table, set with porcelain plates and polished silverware, gleamed like a stage for a performance no one wanted to attend. Amina sat across from her husband, David, his chiseled jaw clenched as he swirled a glass of Merlot, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond her. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that had settled into their 10-year marriage like dust in an attic, unseen but suffocating. Amina, a financial analyst with a mind sharper than the steak knife beside her plate, had always been the backbone of their household. Her salary paid for the manicured lawn outside, the sleek BMW in the garage, and the private school fees for the niece David insisted they sponsor to impress his parents. Yet to David, she was merely the woman who handled the numbers, a role he dismissed with a wave of his hand, as if her work were a trivial hobby. Tonight, though, the weight of that dismissal felt heavier than ever. They were dining at his parents' sprawling estate, a weekly ritual that Amina had come to dread. Eleanor, David's mother, sat at the head of the table, her pearl necklace catching the light as she leaned forward with a practiced smile. Amina, dear, you really must try this new boutique in Short Hills. Their dresses might elevate your wardrobe. Her tone was syrupy, but the barb was clear. Amina's practical blouses and tailored slacks were a constant source of Eleanor's thinly veiled disdain, as if Amina's frugality were a personal affront to the family's image. Robert, David's father, chimed in, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who'd never questioned his own importance. Speaking of elevation, I've got a lead on a real estate deal that'll make us millions. High risk, high reward. None of that penny-pinching nonsense you're always on about, Amina. He chuckled, glancing at David for approval. David smirked, nodding as if his father's reckless ventures were gospel. Amina's suggestion to diversify their investments, meticulously backed by data, had been brushed off earlier that evening with a patronizing, "Let the men handle the big decisions, sweetheart." Amina forced a smile, her fingers tightening around her fork. She wanted to scream that their comfortable life was built on her spreadsheets, her late nights analyzing markets, her refusal to gamble their future on Robert's pipe dreams. Instead, she sipped her water, the ice clinking softly, and let the conversation drift to David's latest obsession, a custom golf club he needed for his weekend tournaments. "It's only a few grand," he said, waving away her glance. "You worry too much, Amina." By the time dessert was served, Eleanor's signature lemon tart as her remarks, the room felt like a pressure cooker. Amina excused herself, claiming a headache, and slipped out to the car. The drive home was silent, David's irritation palpable as he gripped the steering wheel. "You didn't have to be so quiet tonight," he muttered. "Mom and Dad think you're judging them." Amina stared out the window, the manicured hedges blurring past. Judging them? No, she was done with that. She was simply exhausted, exhausted by the pretense, the condescension, the erasure of her worth. On impulse, she asked David to stop at a convenience store a mile from home. "I need some air," she said, stepping out into the cool night. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she wandered the aisles, her mind replaying the evening's slights. At the counter, she noticed a Powerball sign blinking. Jackpot, $50 million. Without thinking, she handed the cashier $1 and asked for a quick pick ticket, using the birth dates of herself and Maya, her long-lost sister she'd recently reconnected with. The cashier, a bored teenager, slid the ticket across the counter. "Good luck," he mumbled. Amina tucked it into her purse, a fleeting thought crossing her mind. What if? Back home, David was already sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to her presence. She retreated to her home office, a small sanctuary of order amidst the chaos of their marriage. The ticket sat on her desk, a small rectangle of possibility. She didn't check it that night. She was too drained, too consumed by the ache of being unseen in her own life. 3 days later, while David was at the golf course, Amina sat at her desk, sipping coffee gone cold. The Powerball drawing had been the night before, and a nagging curiosity pulled her to the lottery website. She typed in the numbers from her ticket, her heart steady, expecting nothing. The screen loaded. Her breath caught. The numbers aligned one by one, like stars in a constellation she'd never dared to dream of. $50 million. Her hands trembled as she double-checked, then triple-checked. The truth settled over her like a cold wave. She was rich beyond imagination. But joy didn't come. Instead, a chilling clarity took hold. For 10 years, she'd carried David, his parents, their expectations, their scorn. She'd been their anchor, their ATM, their invisible pillar. And now, with this fortune in her hands, she saw an opportunity, not to celebrate, but to test, to strip away the masks they wore, to see who they truly were when the money they valued so much was gone. A plan began to form, sharp and deliberate, like the calculations she'd mastered in her career. She wouldn't tell David, not yet, not until she knew the truth about the man she'd vowed to love. Amina leaned back in her chair, the ticket still in her hand. Outside, the suburban street was quiet, but inside her, a storm was brewing, not one of rage, but of resolve. She wasn't the naive wife they thought her to be. She was a strategist, a survivor, and now a multimillionaire with a secret. The game was about to begin, and Amina was ready to play. Amina sat in her office, the Powerball ticket now tucked into a locked drawer, its numbers burned into her memory like a code to a vault. The weight of her secret, $50 million, felt like a loaded gun, one she wasn't ready to fire but was meticulously preparing. The suburban New Jersey house was silent, save for the distant hum of David's sports car pulling into the garage. He'd spent another day at the golf course, likely boasting about his swing to men who cared more about his wallet than his wit. Amina's lips curled into a faint private smile. He had no idea the stage was being set for a performance that would unravel him. Her first move was calculated, executed with the precision of a chess grandmaster. She needed to secure the money, hide it from prying eyes, and ensure no one, not David, not his vulture-like parents, could sniff it out. Amina picked up her phone and dialed Patricia, a financial lawyer she'd met at a conference years ago, whose reputation for discretion was as ironclad as her contracts. "I need a blind trust," Amina said, her voice steady. "No one can know it's me, not my husband, not anyone." Patricia didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. By the end of the call, Amina had a plan to funnel the winnings into an untraceable account, a fortress of wealth no one could breach. The money was hers, safe and silent, waiting for her command. Now came the harder part, the lie. Amina had spent a decade swallowing her pride, playing the dutiful wife while David and his family treated her like a glorified accountant. But this was her moment to turn their assumptions against them. She crafted the story in her mind, each detail polished to perfection. She would tell David she'd made a catastrophic financial mistake, one that wiped out their savings, their retirement fund, their entire life. The idea thrilled her, not because of the deception, but because it would expose the truth. Would David stand by her? Would he prove her wrong, show a shred of loyalty? Or would he confirm the doubts that had gnawed at her for years? She spent the afternoon preparing, her hands steady but her heart racing. She transferred a small portion of their joint savings to a separate account, just enough to make the story plausible without touching the jackpot. She fabricated an email from a fictional colleague, Mark, who'd supposedly tipped her off about a tech stock that promised astronomical returns. She even mocked up a news article about the company's sudden collapse due to a fraud scandal, The kind of thing David would never bother to verify. Every piece of the puzzle was designed to sell the illusion of ruin. That evening, Amina waited until David was home, sprawled on the couch with a beer, his phone glowing with golf scores. She stood in the doorway, her face carefully composed, eyes red from a touch of makeup and a few practiced tears, shoulders slumped as if the world had crushed her. "David," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "We need to talk." He barely glanced up, muttering, "What now?" She took a deep breath, stepping into the role she'd rehearsed. I I made a mistake. A big one." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What kind of mistake?" Amina let her voice crack as she spun the tale. How she'd trusted Mark's advice, poured their savings into the stock, and watched it all vanish when the company imploded. "It's gone," she whispered, letting a single tear fall. "Our savings, the retirement fund, everything. We're broke." The room went still. David's beer bottle froze halfway to his lips, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly twisted into rage. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, slamming the bottle onto the coffee table. "How could you be so stupid, Amina? I told you to stick to your boring spreadsheets. This is why I handle the big stuff." His words stung, but Amina absorbed them, her expression one of guilt while her mind cataloged every syllable. He wasn't asking if she was okay, wasn't reaching for her hand. He was already calculating what this meant for him, his golf club membership, his car, his image. She sank into a chair, playing the part of the broken wife. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was doing the right thing." David paced the room, his hands raking through his hair. "Do you have any idea what this means? We're done, Amina. My parents are going to lose it." There it was, the first mention of Eleanor and Robert, the puppeteers who pulled his strings. Amina's heart hardened, but she kept her eyes downcast, letting him rage. By the time he stormed upstairs, muttering about needing to think, Amina knew the first act was a success. She retreated to her office, locking the door behind her. Her tears dried as quickly as they'd come, replaced by a steely resolve. She pulled out her laptop and reviewed the trust documents Patricia had sent. The $50 million was secure, untouchable. She leaned back, the faintest spark of satisfaction flickering in her chest. David's reaction was exactly what she'd expected, but she wasn't done. This was just the opening scene. Tomorrow she'd call Eleanor and Robert, knowing they'd descend like hawks, ready to tear into her for her failure. She'd play the penitent wife, the fool who'd lost it all, and watch their masks slip. Every word, every glance, every accusation would be a brick in the wall she was building, a wall that would shield her from their betrayal and expose their true colors. Amina glanced at the locked drawer, where the ticket lay hidden. It wasn't just a ticket anymore. It was her weapon, her truth, her way out. The curtain had risen, and Amina was ready to direct the show. The living room was a battlefield, strewn with the wreckage of Amina's carefully constructed lie. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, but the light did nothing to warm the icy tension that had settled over the house. David paced like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear, muttering to someone, likely his father, about the disaster Amina had caused. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of remorse. Beneath it, though, her mind was a storm of calculation, each of David's words a chisel carving away the last remnants of her trust. "You don't get it, do you?" David snapped, ending his call and turning on her. His voice was a blade, sharp and reckless. "This isn't just about money, Amina. It's about us. My reputation, my life. Do you know what this does to me?" His eyes blazed with fury, but there was no concern for her, no flicker of compassion. Amina's fabricated tears had dried the night before, and now she played her role with quiet precision, letting her shoulders slump, her voice soft. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the floor. Inside, she was counting his accusations, cataloging them like evidence in a trial. David didn't comfort her. He didn't ask how she was holding up under the weight of her mistake. Instead, he launched into a tirade about the sacrifices he'd have to make. "My car, do you know how much I put into that thing? And the club membership? You think they'll let me stay when we can't pay the dues?" He ran a hand through his hair, his handsome face contorted with self-pity. I told you to leave the big decisions to me, but no, you had to play the hotshot investor. Amina bit her lip, not to hold back tears, but to suppress the bitter laugh rising in her throat. Big decisions, she thought. The only decisions he'd ever made were which golf course to play and which watch to flaunt. The doorbell rang, a sharp chime that cut through David's rant. Amina's stomach tightened. She knew who it was before David opened the door. Eleanor and Robert swept into the room like royalty inspecting a fallen kingdom, their faces a blend of feigned concern and barely concealed disdain. Eleanor's heels clicked on the floor, her silk scarf fluttering as she surveyed Amina with a look that could curdle cream. "Oh, Amina, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How could you let this happen?" Robert, looming behind her, adjusted his cufflinks and cleared his throat. "We heard everything from David. A complete disaster. I always said women shouldn't meddle in high finance." Amina bowed her head, the picture of contrition, but her pulse quickened with a strange exhilaration. Their words were venom, but they were also proof. Proof that the masks they wore were paper thin. She let them talk, let them pile on the blame. Eleanor perched on an armchair, her manicured nails tapping the armrest. "I warned David years ago," she said, glancing at her son as if Amina weren't in the room. "Marrying someone so practical is fine for managing a household. But money? Real money? That's a man's game." She sighed, theatrical and cutting. "And now look at us, ruined." Robert took over, his voice booming with the authority of a man who'd never been questioned. "We'll have to sell the house, of course," he said, pacing as if he owned the place. "And you, Amina, you'll need to find a second job. Maybe something in bookkeeping, something safe." He turned to David, his tone softening. "Son, you'll need time to recover from this. Take a week at the lake house. Clear your head." Amina's eyes flicked up, catching the exchange. A week at the lake house? While she, the supposed architect of their ruin, was expected to scrape by? The hypocrisy was almost laughable. "I'm so sorry," Amina whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "I thought I was helping us." Eleanor's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing. "Helping? Amina, darling, you've destroyed everything we've worked for. I always knew your penny-pinching ways would lead to trouble." The room fell silent, the weight of their judgment pressing down like a storm cloud. But inside Amina, a fire burned. Every word, every glance was a revelation. The family she'd served, supported, and endured for a decade wasn't rallying around her in crisis. They were tearing her apart. David, silent for once, slumped into a chair, his anger replaced by a sullen resignation. "What are we supposed to do now?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. Amina noted the absence of "we" in his tone. He wasn't thinking of their marriage, their partnership. He was thinking of himself, his image, his comfort. Eleanor reached over, patting his hand. "We'll figure it out, darling. We always do. But Amina," she turned, her smile as sharp as a blade, "you'll need to make this right." Amina nodded, her face a mask of guilt, but her mind was a steel trap. She saw it all now. Their greed, their selfishness, their utter disregard for her as anything more than a means to an end. The $50 million sat safely in her blind trust, a secret weapon they'd never suspect. She'd given them a chance to prove her wrong, to show a shred of loyalty, but they'd failed spectacularly. As Eleanor and Robert began discussing damage control plans, selling assets, cutting expenses, all while casting Amina as the villain, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This wasn't defeat. This was victory. The meeting ended with Robert clapping David on the shoulder, promising to sort this mess out. Eleanor left with a final, pitying glance at Amina, as if she were a broken machine no longer worth fixing. David didn't look at her at all. As the door closed behind them, Amina stood alone in the quiet house, her heart pounding with a mix of grief and triumph. She'd peeled back their facades, and what she found was uglier than she'd imagined. But she wasn't done. The stage was set, the players revealed. Amina straightened, her eyes glinting with resolve. The real test was yet to come, and she was ready to push them further. The air in Amina's New Jersey home was heavy, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the venom of the past few days. David's outbursts had grown sharper, his patience fraying like a worn rope, and the sting of Eleanor and Robert's disdain lingered like smoke. Amina moved through the house like a ghost, playing the part of the repentant wife, her every gesture calculated to maintain the illusion of their ruin. But beneath her subdued exterior, her mind was a furnace, burning with the clarity of her $50 million secret and the bitter truth it had begun to unveil. The stage was set, the players exposed, but Amina wasn't done. She needed one final test, one that would cut deeper than the rest, and it began with a phone call that broke the silence of her carefully orchestrated chaos. The phone buzzed on her desk, the screen lighting up with a name that warmed her heart. Maya. Amina's younger sister, found only months ago after years lost to the labyrinth of foster care, was a quiet force of sincerity in her life. They'd reconnected through a chance encounter at a charity event, and though their bond was still fragile, Maya's earnestness had already carved a place in Amina's guarded heart. She answered, her voice softening. Maya, hi. On the other end, Maya's voice was hesitant but warm. Amina, I heard from a friend you're going through something. Are you okay? Amina's chest tightened. She hadn't told Maya about the bankruptcy, but news traveled fast in their small circle. She let out a shaky breath, feeding the lie. It's been rough. I made a bad investment. We've lost everything. The line went quiet, and for a moment, Amina thought the call had dropped. Then Maya's voice came, small but fierce. I don't have much, but I'm sending you what I can. Check your account. Amina frowned, opening her banking app. A notification blinked, a transfer of $200 from Maya. Her breath caught. Maya, a struggling student drowning in loans, had sent every cent she had. Maya, you can't... Amina started, but her sister cut her off. Please, Amina, it's not much, but don't skip meals, okay? I'll figure out my rent later. The words hit Amina like a tidal wave, not because of the money, but because of the selflessness behind it. In the midst of her staged crisis, Maya's act of love was a beacon, stark against the darkness of David's betrayal. Amina's plans shifted, her resolve hardening. She needed to test David one last time to see if any shred of loyalty remained in the man she'd shared a decade with. That evening, as David scrolled through his phone, his mood sour as ever, Amina sat across from him, her face pale with feigned worry. David, she said, her voice trembling just enough. I got a call from Maya's roommate. She's been in an accident. She needs $1,000 for the hospital bills, or they won't release her. She watched his face closely, searching for a flicker of compassion. David's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. An accident? Are you serious, Amina? We don't have a dime to our name, and you want to throw money at some girl we barely know? His voice rose, sharp and dismissive. She's not our family. Let her figure it out. The words landed like a guillotine, severing the last thread of hope Amina had clung to. She'd expected his selfishness, but the coldness in his tone, the way he reduced Maya, her sister, to some girl, was a wound that cut deeper than his earlier rants. She stared at him, her face a mask of shock, but inside her heart was a fortress, unyielding. She's my sister, Amina said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm within. David scoffed, tossing his phone onto the couch. Sister? You met her, what, 6 months ago? We're drowning, Amina. Focus on us. Us, she thought bitterly. There was no us in his world, only him. Amina stood, her movements slow and deliberate, as if carrying the weight of her decision. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She retreated to her office, locking the door behind her. Alone, she let the tears come. Not for David, but for the years she'd spent believing in a man who saw her as a means to an end. She opened her laptop, checking the blind trust Patricia had set up. The $50 million sat untouched, a silent promise of freedom. But it wasn't the money that fueled her now. It was the clarity. Maya's $200, sent without hesitation, was worth more than David's empty vows. It was love, raw and real, and it anchored Amina in a way her marriage never had. She leaned back, her eyes drifting to a photo on her desk. Her and Maya at a diner, laughing over cheap coffee. It was their first meeting after years apart, a moment of tentative hope. Amina's plan had been to test David, but Maya's call had done something more. It had reminded her what family could be. She wiped her tears, her resolve crystallizing. David's refusal wasn't just a failure. It was a death knell for their marriage. He'd shown his true colors, and they were as cold as she'd feared. The next act was coming, and Amina was no longer the grieving wife. She was the director, the judge, and soon, the one who would walk away. The house was quiet, David's snores drifting from upstairs. Amina's fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to call Maya and tell her the truth. But not yet. The stage wasn't fully set. She needed to see how far David would fall, how deep his betrayal would run. The $50 million was her shield, her sword, and her ticket to a new life. One where loyalty wasn't a test, but a given. As the night deepened, Amina felt a strange peace settle over her. The storm wasn't over, but she was ready to face it, armed with the truth and a sister who'd already proven her worth. The house in suburban New Jersey, once a symbol of Amina's hard-earned stability, now felt like a stage where every creak of the floorboards signaled the unraveling of her marriage. The air was thick with the fallout of her fabricated bankruptcy, and David's demeanor had shifted from anger to a sullen, simmering resentment. Amina moved through the days like an actor in a tragedy, her face etched with the guilt she'd crafted. But her heart was a vault, locked tight around the $50 million truth. She'd seen David's true colors, his selfishness, his dismissal of her sister Maya. But she wasn't prepared for the depth of betrayal that awaited, a final act that would shatter any lingering illusions about the man she'd loved for a decade. David's behavior had grown erratic, his once charming facade replaced by a cold irritability. He snapped at Amina over trivialities, the way she folded his shirts, the coffee she brewed too weak, treating her less like a partner and more like a servant who'd failed him. "You've ruined us," he muttered one morning, slamming a cabinet shut as she prepared breakfast. "I can't even look at you without thinking about what we've lost." Amina swallowed the retort burning in her throat, her eyes downcast to hide the fire within. She noted every slight, every barb, storing them like ammunition for the reckoning to come. The first crack in the facade came late one evening, as Amina sat in her office, reviewing the blind trust documents Patricia had sent. The $50 million was secure, a silent fortress, but her focus was on David's growing distance. He'd been secretive, slipping out for meetings at odd hours, his phone perpetually angled away from her. Suspicion gnawed at her, but she needed proof. On a whim, she checked their shared cloud account, a digital relic from early in their marriage when trust was still a given. There, buried in a folder labeled Work, was a string of messages synced from David's phone. Her heart sank as she opened them, revealing a conversation with a woman named Vanessa. The messages were a knife to the gut. "I can't stay with her," David had written. "She's a failure, Vanessa. I'm done being tied to someone who drags me down." Vanessa's replies were syrupy, promising a better life and hinting at her own wealth. A sugar mama who could keep David in the lifestyle he craved. Amina's hands trembled as she scrolled, each word a confirmation of the betrayal she'd feared. He wasn't just abandoning her, he was plotting to leave her with nothing. Another message caught her eye. "I'm moving some stuff to my name. Don't worry, she won't notice. She's too busy crying over her mistake." Amina's breath hitched. He was referring to assets. Their second car, a watch he'd claimed was borrowed. Small but deliberate thefts to secure his escape. Her mind raced, piecing together the scope of his deception. She'd hired a private investigator days earlier, a precaution after David's refusal to help Maya. The investigator's report, delivered that morning, confirmed her worst fears. Photos of David with Vanessa at a downtown hotel, laughing over cocktails, his hand on her waist. The evidence was a noose, tightening around the last vestiges of their marriage. Amina sat back, her office chair creaking in the silence. The man she'd built a life with wasn't just disloyal. He was a vulture, picking at the bones of their shared past to fund his future without her. The next day, David's behavior grew bolder, as if he sensed the end was near. He came home late, reeking of cologne and whiskey, and didn't bother with excuses. "I'm going to the lake house tomorrow," he announced, tossing his keys onto the counter. "I need space to think." Amina nodded, her face a mask of submission, but her mind was a storm of resolve. "Of course," she said softly, her voice laced with a sadness she didn't feel. She was done grieving for a man who saw her as a liability. The lake house, a gift from Robert and Eleanor, was another symbol of their control, a place where David could sulk while she was left to fix their ruin. That night, as David slept, Amina slipped into her office and called Patricia. "I need everything ready," she whispered. "The trust, the divorce papers, the evidence, everything." Patricia's voice was calm, professional. "It's all in place. You say the word and we move." Amina hung up, her gaze falling on the locked drawer where the Powerball ticket lay. It wasn't just a ticket anymore. It was her liberation, her justice. David's betrayal wasn't a surprise, but its audacity fueled her. He thought he could leave her with nothing, but she held the keys to a fortune he'd never touch. The following morning, as David packed a bag for the lake house, Amina watched him from the kitchen, her coffee growing cold. His movements were careless, confident, as if he'd already written her off. "Don't wait up," he said, not meeting her eyes. Amina's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "I won't," she replied, her voice steady. He didn't notice the steel in her tone, the shift from victim to victor. As the door closed behind him, Amina felt the weight of 10 years lift. The final straw had fallen, and with it, the last of her doubts. David had failed her test spectacularly, but the real performance was yet to come. She wasn't the broken wife he imagined. She was a woman armed with truth, wealth, and a plan to dismantle his world. Amina opened her laptop, pulling up the divorce papers Patricia had drafted. Her eyes scanned the terms. No alimony, no claim to her assets, full disclosure of his infidelity. The evidence, texts, photos, financial records, was a guillotine waiting to drop. She leaned back, the silence of the house a canvas for her next move. The dinner she'd planned, the one where she'd confront David and his parents, was no longer a distant idea. It was imminent, a reckoning that would expose them all. Amina's heart beat steady, not with fear, but with purpose. The curtain was about to fall, and she was ready to take center stage. The dining room of Amina's New Jersey home was transformed into a stage for the final act, the air taut with the weight of impending revelation. The table was set with a deceptive simplicity: white plates, a single vase of lilies, and a bottle of David's favorite Merlot, untouched. Amina had invited David, Eleanor, and Robert under the pretense of discussing the divorce and debt arrangements. Her voice on the phone meek, almost broken. They'd agreed to come, their responses dripping with condescension, eager to lecture her one last time. But Amina was no longer the penitent wife. She stood in her kitchen, her hands steady as she arranged a folder of documents, each page a weapon forged in the fire of her $50 million secret. Tonight the mask would fall, and she would be the one to pull the curtain down. David arrived first, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding hers. He wore the smug air of a man who thought he'd already won, his affair with Vanessa, a secret he believed was safe. Eleanor and Robert followed, sweeping into the house like judges at a trial, their faces a blend of pity and superiority. Eleanor's silk dress rustled as she settled into a chair, her lips pursed. "Let's make this quick, Amina," she said, her tone sharp. "We need to discuss how you'll handle this mess." Robert nodded, adjusting his cufflinks. "We've already spoken to a lawyer about protecting David's interests." Amina's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. They had no idea the tables were about to turn. She served dinner, a simple roast, a nod to the normalcy they expected, but her movements were deliberate, each step a beat in the rhythm of her plan. As they ate, David complained about the humiliation of selling his car, while Eleanor lamented the shame this would bring to their social circle. Amina listened, her face a mask of contrition, but her pulse thrummed with anticipation. She waited until the plates were cleared, the room heavy with their self-righteous chatter, before she spoke. "I have something to show you," she said, her voice soft but steady, like the calm before a storm. She placed a thick folder on the table, its contents meticulously prepared by Patricia, her lawyer. David frowned, his fork pausing midair. "What's this?" he asked, irritation lacing his voice. Amina opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. Bank statements from the blind trust, glowing with the figure of $50 million. Divorce papers, crisp and final, and a series of photographs and text messages, courtesy of the private investigator, documenting David's affair with Vanessa. The room went silent, the air sucked out as if by a vacuum. Eleanor's hand froze on her wine glass. Robert's jaw slackened, and David's face drained of color. "What is this?" David stammered, his voice cracking. Amina's eyes met his, cold and unyielding. "This," she said, tapping the bank statement, "is the truth. I won the Powerball, David. $50 million. It's safe, untouchable, and not a cent of it belongs to you." She slid the divorce papers toward him, her voice like steel. "These are for you to sign. No alimony, no assets, no second chances." She turned to Eleanor and Robert, their faces a mix of shock and dawning greed. "And these," she said, fanning out the photos of David and Vanessa, "are proof of who your son really is." Eleanor gasped, her hand clutching her pearls. "Amina, darling, this is a misunderstanding," she began, her voice syrupy with panic. Amina cut her off, her tone icy. "No, Eleanor, the misunderstanding was mine, thinking you ever saw me as family." She stood, her presence commanding the room. "I gave you all a chance. I told you we were broke, that I'd failed, to see if you'd stand by me. Instead, you blamed me, belittled me, and David—" She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "You planned to leave me for someone richer, someone who could keep you in the life you think you deserve." David's mouth opened, but no words came. Robert sputtered, "This is outrageous. You can't—" Amina silenced him with a look. "I can, and I will. This house, this life, it's over. You'll leave tonight, and you'll take nothing but the truth." She leaned forward, her voice ablade. "For 10 years I was your bank, your servant, your scapegoat. I built this life, and you tore it down. Now I'm done. The curtain's falling, and you're not part of the encore." The room was a tableau of shock. Eleanor's eyes wide with fear, Robert's hands trembling, David frozen, his world collapsing. Amina felt no joy, only a quiet triumph. She'd stripped them bare, exposed their greed and betrayal. "Sign the papers, David," she said, her voice calm but final. "Or these photos go public, and your family's precious reputation goes with them." David's hand shook as he reached for the pen, his signature scrawled in defeat. Eleanor's protest dissolved into sobs, and Robert sat silent, his authority shattered. Amina stood tall, her heart steady. "Get out," she said, her voice echoing through the room. They rose, stumbling like actors who'd forgotten their lines, and filed out into the night. The door closed with a finality that reverberated through the house. Amina stood alone, the folder still open on the table, the lilies wilting in their vase. The stage was empty, the performance over. She'd played her part to perfection, and now, with the truth laid bare, she was free. The $50 million wasn't just her fortune, it was her justice, her rebirth. As the silence settled, Amina felt the first stirrings of peace. The next act was hers alone to write. The suburban house in New Jersey, once a cage of polished pretense, was gone. Amina had sold it without a backward glance, severing the last tether to a decade of silent sacrifice. The divorce papers, signed in David's trembling hand, had ensured her freedom, his betrayal exposed, and his family's influence dissolved like ash in the wind. Now standing on the balcony of a Manhattan penthouse, Amina gazed at the city skyline, its lights glittering like a constellation of possibilities. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a new beginning. She was no longer the invisible wife, the scapegoat, the ATM. She was Amina, architect of her own destiny, armed with $50 million and a heart ready to heal. The penthouse was a sanctuary, chosen not for its grandeur, but for its warmth. A place where she and Maya, her long-lost sister, could build something real. The deal had closed quietly, the blind trust shielding her wealth from prying eyes. Amina had invited Maya for dinner, framing it as a simple catch-up, but her true intention burned brightly, to offer her sister a home, a family, a chance to rewrite their fractured past. As she set the table, simple ceramic plates, a far cry from Eleanor's ostentatious porcelain, she felt a nervous flutter. This wasn't just about a place to live. It was about trust, about proving to Maya that love could be a constant, not a fleeting gift. Maya arrived, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes wary but warm. The penthouse's open layout, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and soft cream walls, seemed to overwhelm her. Amina, this place, she trailed off, her voice small. Amina smiled, guiding her to the table where a spread of homemade dishes, roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, and Maya's favorite mango lassi, waited. Sit, Amina said gently. I have something to tell you. Over dinner, she revealed the truth. The Powerball win, the staged bankruptcy, David's betrayal, and the fortune now secured in her name. Maya's eyes widened, her fork frozen midair. 50 million? She whispered, disbelief etching her face. And you did all this to test them? Amina nodded, her voice steady. I needed to know who they were, and I found out. She reached across the table, her hand resting near Maya's. But I also found you. That $200 you sent me, it meant more than any of their promises. You're my family, Maya. I want this, she gestured to the penthouse, to be our home. 2 bedrooms, one for you, one for me. A place where we can start over, together. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head, her voice trembling. I can't, Amina. This is too much. I'm used to scraping by, to not belonging anywhere. A place like this, it feels like a dream that'll vanish. Her words carried the weight of years in foster care, of families that had taken her in only to let her go. Amina's heart ached, recognizing that fear, the belief that good things were never meant to last. She slid her chair closer, her voice soft but firm. I know what it's like to feel out of place, Maya. For 10 years, I lived in a house that wasn't mine, with people who didn't see me. This money doesn't define us. It's just a tool, a way to build something real, something ours. Maya looked away, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible. What if I don't belong here either? Amina reached for her hand, holding it gently. You belong because you're with me. We're not just sisters by blood. We're sisters by choice. We'll learn together what it means to be home. The words hung between them, a vow as solid as the city below. Maya's tears fell, but she nodded, a tentative spark of hope in her eyes. Over the next weeks, Amina set about making the penthouse theirs. She transformed Maya's room into a creative haven, complete with an easel, sketch pads, and a sleek computer for her architectural designs. They spent evenings painting walls in soft blues and golds, laughing over spilled paint and shared stories of their childhoods, fragmented memories pieced together like a mosaic. Amina encouraged Maya to see a therapist, sitting with her after sessions to listen, to hold space for the pain that had shaped her. Slowly, Maya's guarded posture softened, her smiles growing brighter, her confidence blooming in the safety of their new home. Amina's own healing took root in purpose. She poured a portion of her fortune into the Sunrise Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting foster youth with scholarships and mental health resources. It was her way of honoring Maya's resilience, of giving others the chance she'd fought for. The work grounded her, a reminder that wealth was a means, not an end. One Sunday morning, the penthouse kitchen glowed with sunlight, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. Amina and Maya stood side by side, brewing a pot and trading playful jabs about who made it better. They carried their mugs to the balcony, the city stretching out below, alive with possibility. Maya's hand brushed Amina's, a quiet gesture of trust. Thank you, she said, her voice steady now, for giving me a home. Amina's heart swelled, her smile radiant. No, Maya, thank you for showing me what home really is. They stood together, watching the sunrise paint the skyline gold. The past, David, Eleanor, Robert, The years of erasure was gone, burned away by truth and time. Amina and Maya weren't just survivors. They were builders of a new dawn, their bond a foundation stronger than any fortune. As the city woke, they faced it together, sisters not by chance but by choice, ready to write the next chapter of their lives. As the sun rises over Amina and Maya's new beginning, we close the curtain on a story of betrayal, resilience, and the power of chosen family. What did you think of Amina's journey? Did her test of loyalty surprise you, or did you see the cracks in her marriage from the start? Share your thoughts, reflections, or even your own stories of trust and triumph in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Thank you for joining me in this tale of heartbreak and hope. Until our next story, stay curious and keep believing in new dawns. See you soon.